Welcome back to Women Writers in Chinese History. In this last video of our class, I'm going to briefly introduce modern Chinese history and women writers from the modern and contemporary periods. By this point, we have concluded our main course contents, and our end point is the death of the feminist and woman writer Qiu Jin in 1907. Qiu Jin was certainly not the only feminist fighting for women's rights in early 20th century China, and Chinese women's writing continued to demonstrate a rich vitality throughout the rapid changes of modern China. This lecture video is to showcase a few key moments in modern Chinese history and women writers whose works are reflective of these moments. In this manner, it serves as an epilogue to this class, as well as a preview of the topic of modern Chinese women writers, which you might want to explore further. In our last lecture, we have mentioned that Qiu Jin was in contact with the leader of the Chinese Revolution, Sun Zhongshan or Sun Yat-sen. Born in 1866, Sun Zhongshan was one of the best-known figures in Chinese history and has been revered as the founding father of modern China. We have seen from the example of Qiu Jin the resolve of the Chinese revolutionaries of the time to fight for a republic. In 1911, only 4 years after Qiu Jin's execution, this vision came true as revolutionary uprisings broke out across China, resulting in the abdication of China's last emperor, Pu Yi. Pu Yi ascended throne when he was not yet 3 in 1908. That was the year when both Empress Dowager Cixi and Emperor Guangxu passed away. Emperor Guangxu was likely poisoned to death by Cixi. Guangxu didn't have any son, and Pu Yi was selected from the household of a half-brother of his. As the last emperor of the Qing and of the entire Chinese imperial history, he was on the throne for 3 years and was only 6 when the Qing court announced his abdication. Pu Yi would continue to play an interesting role in modern Chinese history, and there is a well-known film, The Last Emperor, based on his life. This film is directed by the Italian director Bernardo Bertolucci and won 9 Academy Awards in 1988. The 1911 revolution that overthrew the Chinese imperial system is known as the Xinhai Revolution, 辛亥革命, according to the Chinese time designation of the year. Following its success, Sun Zhongshan was selected as the interim president of the newly established Republic of China, Zhonghua Minguo. However, Sun Zhongshan did not control the then modernized army force, and he soon gave up his presidency to Yuan Shikai, a military general who played a crucial role in forcing Pu Yi's abdication. In 1915, Yuan Shikai wanted to revive monarchy and became the emperor himself, but his decision was met with vehement oppositions across the new republic. His attempt failed, and he himself died of illness the next year. Then different regions of China came under the control of warlords. Globally, this was the period of World War I, from 1914 to 1918. Political situations throughout the world were tumultuous. In 1917, China joined World War I and sided with the Allied powers, including Great Britain, France, Japan, the United States, and so forth, against the Central Powers led by Germany. China joined the war with the hope to retrieve the German colony in Qingdao, a northern coastal region of great economic and military significance. However, even though China belonged to the winning side at the end of the war, at the signing of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, the International Council mostly consisted of European nations decided to transfer Germany's control in Qingdao to Imperial Japan instead of reestablishing Chinese sovereignty over the region. This decision infuriated the Chinese populace, especially intellectuals and college students. While condemning the International Council and Imperial Japan, they also blamed the warlord government, then led by a military general named Duan Qirui, for its weakness and corruption. Thus, on May 4, 1919, college students from various areas met in Peking, or today's Beijing, went on the city streets to protest against the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Student protests continued for months and triggered similar demonstrations across the nation. The event of May 4, 1919 represents larger intellectual trends in search of political and cultural modernity, which already began in the 1910s and became a full-blown social movement after 1919 all the way through the 1920s. This development during the first 2 decades of the 20th century is now referred to as the May 4th movement or the New Culture movement. Other than political protests, the May 4th movement is represented by the emergence of periodicals such as New Youth, Qin Qingnian, which place an emphasis on modernizing Chinese literature, in particular on promoting vernacular writing and modern fiction. Furthermore, the New Culture movement brought about a full-scale repudiation of Confucianism and the traditional family system, as marked by filial piety, arranged marriage, and the limitation of women to the inner quarters. Meanwhile, New Culture intellectuals promoted Western ideals, then personified as Mr. Democracy, De Xiansheng, and Mr. Science, Sai Xiansheng, which they viewed as the fundamental principles for modernizing Chinese society and culture. However, experiences with Western colonization and imperialism also cast doubts on many intellectuals' minds on borrowing directly from Western industrial capitalism. This was a period when Marxism was on the rise, and following the Russian Revolution from 1917 to 1923, a number of intellectuals started to turn to communism as the paradigm for Chinese modernity, and the Chinese Communist Party came into place in 1921. In 1930, a number of writers affiliated with communism formed the League of Left-Wing Writers, Zuolian. Even though the League itself lasted only 5 years, many writers who had joined the organization became influential figures in Chinese literary history. In the 1930s, China was also swept into the devastating Second Sino-Japanese War, which is known in Chinese as 抗日战争, War of Resistance against Japanese aggression. This war began with Imperial Japan's invasion and occupation of the northeast regions in 1931. Later, the Second Sino-Japanese War became a key East Asian battleground of World War II. Chinese casualties through this war that lasted a total of 14 years have been estimated to be 35 million. Following the end of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1945, China entered a period of civil war between the Nationalist Party and the Communist Party. This war ended in 1949 with the Communist Party's establishment of the People's Republic of China, 中华人民共和国. After 1949, Chinese modern history continued to experience periods of upheavals, especially the Cultural Revolution between 1966 and 1976. Following the end of the Cultural Revolution, in 1978, China adopted the opening up and reform policy to reconnect with the outside world and develop its economy. The socioeconomic pattern coming out of 1978 continues to characterize today's China, as Chinese economy grew rapidly, rising from roughly $300 per capita annual GDP in 1980 to around 8,000 to 10,000 per capita annual GDP today in 2020. Even though this number is still well below United States per capita annual GDP of around $60,000 to $65,000. Again, a great reference book to learn all these historical processes in detail is The Search for Modern China by Jonathan Spence. Here, to focus on our topic on women's history and women writers, we begin with a brief introduction of a few feminists coeval with Chu Jin. One of them is He Zhen, who in many ways resembled Chu Jin in following an anarchist ideal and promoting a radical revolution by means of assassination and military uprising. Her husband Liu Shipei was a famous scholar of the time and also a revolutionary. The couple founded a newspaper called The Heavenly Principle, 天意, to spread their ideas about the revolution. There, He Zhen published articles to correlate women's liberation with the eradication of all social hierarchies, including the capitalist hierarchy based on economic inequality. For thousands of years, the world has been dominated by the rule of man. This rule is marked by class distinctions over which men and men only exert proprietary rights. To rectify the wrongs, we must first abolish the rule of man and introduce equality among human beings, which means that the world must belong equally to men and women. The goal of equality cannot be achieved except through women's liberation. Based on this perspective, He Zhen had a more skeptical view in comparison to Chu Jin on the status of Western women and on women's participation in the workforce. In her view, this structure could continue to generate oppressions on women and an economically unequal capitalist system. He Zhen's later years were shrouded in controversy and mystery. There were charges that she and her husband Liu Shipei became traitors of the revolution. In 1919, her husband Liu Shipei died of tuberculosis, and it's been said that she suffered a mental breakdown and soon passed away afterwards, even though other accounts say that she became a Buddhist nun. Another feminist who made actual advancement in women's rights is Tang Chunying. She was acquainted with Chu Jin and served as the chairwoman of the Women's Suffrage Alliance, which advocated for gender equality, women's right to vote, and monogamy. From the 1910s to the 1920s, Tang Chunying fought tirelessly to include the language on gender equality and women's suffrage in the constitution of the newly founded republic. Later, she also spent her life savings on funding women's schools. Tang Chunying passed away in 1937 at the age of 66. Finally, another interesting figure from the period is Lü Bicheng, who enjoyed great fame during her lifetime. As early as 1903, at the age of 20, she became an editor for the influential national newspaper Da Gong Bao. She was a gifted writer, known for her Ci poetry, and became a friend of Chu Jin's. From 1903 to 1912, she led a women's school named Beiyang Women's Normal School. Later, between 1918 and 1920, she studied in Columbia University. She went abroad again and traveled across Europe and North America in the 1920s. From her photos, we can tell that she was a socialite and fashionista. Meanwhile, she also became a devout Buddhist since the 1920s and an advocate for animal rights. In 1929, she gave an influential speech at the Animal Protection Congress in Vienna against the slaughtering of animals. Lü Bicheng remained unmarried even though she had many admirers. She formally converted to Buddhism in 1930 and was devoted to Buddhist writings. In 1943, she passed away in Hong Kong due to illness at the age of 60. The above examples may give us a sense of the scope and diversity of feminist figures who were active in early 20th century China. At the same time, the new culture movement of the 1910s and 1920s is a watershed in Chinese literary history as well as the history of Chinese women's writing. We have mentioned that the new culture movement is characterized by a full rejection of the classical literary tradition. This rejection was based on the belief that old literary forms had degenerative effects on the national character. This, in the words of Chen Duxiu, a leading figure of the new culture movement, these types of literature are both causes and effects of our national character of flattery, boasting, insincerity, and flagrant disregard of truth and facts. Now that we want political reform, we must regenerate the literature of those who are entrenched in political life. The new literary form promoted by the new culture movement features the use of the modern vernacular language and adoption of Western literary forms, in particular the form of modern fiction that focuses on individual psychology and subjectivity. In particular, new culture writers began to write first-person narratives, a literary approach that was almost non-existent in the classical tradition. Reflecting these literary changes, Lu Xun's short fiction Diary of a Madman, 狂人日记, is often viewed as the founding piece of modern Chinese literature. From the perspective of a narrator who apparently suffers from paranoia and is on the verge of madness, Lu Xun's fiction thus criticizes the old tradition. I tried to look this up, but my history has no chronology, and scrawled all over each page are the words virtue and morality. Since I could not sleep anyway, I read intently half the night until I began to see words between the lines, the whole book being filled with the two words, eat people. Lu Xun's metaphor of cannibalism is characteristic of new cultured intellectuals' critiques on the oppressive nature of the old system. In this larger cultural atmosphere, women's writings also became drastically different from those of the past, and one of the earliest works that reflect this shift is Ding Ling's Miss Sophia's Diary, 沙菲女士的日记, in 1927. This short fiction is written in a stream of consciousness style as the diary of the narrator Sophia, 沙菲, a westernized name indicating her identity as a rebellious new woman. Her narration is fragmentary and often opaque, focusing on her own reflections. Sophia has been suffering from tuberculosis, which is a subtext of her unrestrained pursuit of her desires, since she does not expect to live long. At the center of her diary is her desire for a lover who seems to be an overseas Chinese from Southeast Asia. While obsessed with her lover's body, she despises his soul or character, and thus often struggling between her own impulses and judgment. Miss Sophia's Diary marks a new beginning in Chinese women's writings, for its first-person narration on intimate details of one's personal life, the topic of female sexuality, and complex reflections on gender identity. By portraying an obsession with her lover's body and the rejection of his soul, the fiction implicitly reverses the traditional gender hierarchy that relates women to the body and men to the mind or soul. Miss Sophia's Diary brought Ding Ling immediate literary fame. Later, Ding Ling turned to communism and joined the Communist Party in 1932. In 1948, she published a well-known novel on the land reform in northern China under the title The Sun Shines Over the Sangan River, 太阳照在桑干河上. Xiao Hong is another famous woman writer of the 1930s and 1940s. She was most famous for her novels in the brutal setting of the Second Sino-Japanese War, Field of Life and Death, 生死场, in 1935, and Tales of Hulan River, 呼兰河传, in 1942. Xiao Hong wrote from a third-person perspective, and her writing is characterized by a modernist style that brings out the brutality and absurdity of life for impoverished peasants during the war, especially peasant women. Her writings are devoid of explicit ideological orientations, highlighting instead the suffering within the human condition. Xiao Hong herself suffered from a lung disease and died from a botched surgery at the age of 31. Another name we must mention is Aileen Chen, or Zhang Ailing. Born in a prestigious family in Shanghai, she was famous for her romance stories set in realistic historical and everyday settings, especially in 1940s Shanghai and Japanese-occupied Hong Kong. Her writing style is reminiscent of the detailed and subtle description of social manners and individual feelings in traditional novels such as The Dream of the Red Chamber. What is also notable about her work is the absence of explicit political subtexts or ideological orientations, which characterized many other writers of the period. Aileen Chen gained literary fame since her 20s and also wrote scripts for the then emerging film industry. She lived in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and the US, where she stayed since the 1950s. She died at her home in Los Angeles at the age of 75. Aileen Chen is one of the best translated Chinese women writers in English. This slide provides a list of these translations. Her novella Lust Caution, 色戒, has been adapted into a major feature film by the Academy Award-winning director An Li. Set in the backdrop of the Second Sino-Japanese War, the story portrays a female spy's complex political and sexual relations with the target she seduces and tries to assassinate, a security chief working for Japanese occupiers. It was likely inspired by a true event. Ling, Xiao Hong, and Aileen Chen represent the first generation of modern Chinese women writers from the 1920s to the 1940s. Then, in the opening up and reform era after 1978, new generations of women writers emerged in the rapidly changing setting of Chinese society and economy. One well-known woman writer who started to publish in the 1980s is Wang Anyi. Wang Anyi was born in a literary family in the city of Shanghai. She was in middle school when the Cultural Revolution started, during which schools were disbanded. Similar to other students during the time at Sandown Youth's Zhiqing, she spent some years on the countryside. During the Cultural Revolution, she was secretly reading translated novels by Tolstoy, Romain Rolland, and so forth. In an interview in the 2000s, she commented that she felt at odds with the new era since everything is moving so fast, in contrast to the time of her youth, when there was material sparsity, but one could enjoy a richness inside, which had motivated her to become a literary author. Wang Anyi is a very prolific writer, having written over a dozen novels as well as many books of short stories and essays. Her most famous work is the novel The Song of Everlasting Sorrow, 长恨歌, which traces changes in the city of Shanghai from the 1940s to the 1980s by following the life experience of its female protagonist, Wang Qiyao. For its detailed depictions of Shanghai life and broad reflection of the city's history, the book has been praised as a modern epic of Shanghai. In the 1990s, experimental avant-garde fiction was on the rise in Chinese literature. Women writers representing this trend include Chen Ran and Can Xue. Their stories are often told through a first-person voice and portray topics of alienation, depression, and madness from female perspectives, reflecting influences from existentialism, modernism, and feminism. Writers such as Wang Anyi, Chen Ran, and Can Xue represent the field of the serious literature, and their works have been widely studied by literary critics. At the same time, China's market economy also gave rise to best-selling female authors whose works had mass appeal. One notable group of authors of this kind consists of the so-called beauty writers, 美女作家, including Wei Hui and Mian Mian, whose works caused broad attention and controversy in the early 2000s. Wei Hui's work Shanghai 宝贝, Shanghai Baby, and Mian Mian's work Candy, Tang, are both written from a first-person perspective, in the voice of a young urban woman feeling confused and lost about their future and their relationships. With this theme, they contain explicit references to female sexuality and drug use. Whereas these works are reminiscent of Dingling's Miss Sophia's Diary, they have been criticized for lacking deeper substance or celebrating decadence. For a period of time, these books were banned in mainland China. In terms of commercial success, no other female author could beat Chung Yao, a Taiwanese writer and media producer who is the queen of Chinese language popular romance, 言情小说. From the 1960s to the 2000s, Chung Yao published over 50 best-selling romantic novels, and these books have been adapted into more than 100 films and TV dramas. Her novels often contain allusions to classical poetry and sometimes feature historical settings. The stories are usually melodramatic and implies a Cinderella-like plot through which the female protagonist fights against all odds and finds her true love with a man with a privileged background. This narrative structure reduces the complexity of social reality and appeals to the fantasy of young urban readers. By now, we have introduced the lineage of women writers from Dingling and Xiaohong to Chen Ran and Can Xue, who represent women's presence in serious literature and women's participation in mass culture and media as represented by the case of Chung Yao. Finally, I'd like to introduce the Taiwanese writer Qiu Miaojin, a pioneer of lesbian literature in Chinese language writings. From time to time, the works of modern women writers imply traces of homoerotic desire, yet their predominant mode is heterosexual. Qiu Miaojin was nonetheless explicit about her lesbian identity and renders the formation of this identity and the social pressures of confronting this identity the main theme of her fictional writing. From 1994 to 1996, Qiu Miaojin produced 3 novels, the best known of which is Notes of a Crocodile, 鳄鱼手记. The name of the main character of the book, La La, became the source of the Chinese slang word for lesbian. Qiu Miaojin graduated as a psychology major from the National Taiwan University and moved to Paris in 1994 to pursue graduate studies in clinical psychology and feminism at University of Paris H, studying with the famous feminist philosopher Hélène Cixous. However, unfortunately, likely due to depression, she committed suicide in 1995 at the age of 26. After her death, Qiu Miaojin became an LGBT icon in Taiwan, and her books established a model for Chinese language lesbian writing. In this lecture, we have left out many other well-known women writers of mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and overseas Chinese communities. In the new millennium, women writers were also active in the emerging fields of science fiction, internet fiction, and postmodern fiction. Likely, as women writers' literary activities become increasingly diversified and broad, it's more and more difficult to define the subject of women's writings and how to approach them. Should we understand women's writings simply as writings by any women, or define the field more narrowly as those expressing distinctive female perspectives, feminist agendas, or explorations of the question of gender and sexuality? Whatever our answer is, it's clear that female authors have enriched modern Chinese literary history in significant ways and are present at all fronts of its development. In comparison to their predecessors in the traditional period, women writers of the modern and contemporary periods certainly possess much increased opportunities and mobility. Yet, the theme of alienation and confusion prevalent in their writing indicates the many question marks surrounding the female identity. Whereas a radical break took place in women's writings across the tradition-modern divide, modern Chinese women writers continue to test the limits of social and cultural constructions of womanhood. In this regard, the present echoes the past, despite the rise of drastically new historical patterns. On this note, we conclude all the lectures for this class. It's a pleasure having you in this class, and I hope that you found the course materials both enjoyable and thought-provoking, and may want to explore the topics of women's writing and of Chinese culture and history further. I look forward to your final project and hope to see you in another class.